Kindra, thank you so much for being here.
I am so thrilled to be here. I've been looking forward to this forever. It feels like what a highlight of my day, of my week.
That's so sweet. I'm so glad that we finally were able to sync up our schedules. And I was just saying to you before we hit record, I've just been seeing your book everywhere. A lot of our mutual friends are just loving it. The world is enjoying it. It's such an important concept. It's such an important thing for everybody to really get. The name of the book, for anyone who's listening who hasn't yet seen it: Choose Your Story, Change Your Life, Silence Your Inner Critic, and Rewrite Your Life from the Inside Out. Yeah, like if there's like anything that's like a must read and a must do, it's that. So we're going to go into your whole like journey and all of that, but I think we should start here. We should start with the book because it's
Yeah.
so important, and then we can kind of go back. So this is so essential. Why did you come to this work, and why do you want other people to walk away and do this?
Yeah, and that's the entire reason. Anytime you sit down to write a book, it's like, wait, what do I want someone to walk away with? Like if they put in the time to read the words on the page or listen to it however they do, like what mark do I want to leave? So my passion, my research, my curiosity has always been in the power of storytelling. And for the whole first part of my career, it was the research in the effectiveness and the different abilities of outward stories, the stories we tell others for marketing, sales, leadership, etc., which is fascinating in and of itself. But throughout that research, and then even as I was sharing that message and through my own experience, I was realizing that just the same things that make a story compelling as we tell it outwardly are the same things that are happening within our own mind, within our own subconscious, and how truly the behaviors we take, the decisions we make, the way we feel about ourselves, how we feel about others, so much of that is actually locked up and determined in this invisible force that, and I say invisible because it's so subconscious, that are our stories. And seeing the simple difference or the profound difference, something as simple as choosing to tell stories in business and the changes that can make, I wondered if those same changes could happen internally for ourselves if we simply were more aware and conscious of the stories we had on repeat. Yeah.
It's so important. And I was, I don't mean to name drop. That's not why I'm saying this, but my husband's like, every time you say that, I'm like, it's not what I mean. I'm trying to give it importance. I'm trying to give it weight. So we just had Deepak Chopra on the show.
Yes, I
And
love him.
of course you do.
We
And
had an interview together. He's great. Yeah.
he's great. And he was saying that the number two cause of death in kids and teenagers is suicide. And the reason being is because they, like most people, we don't remember who we are. And he said, who we are is not our story. It's not the fictional. He's like, I'm not this character, Deepak Chopra. I am just the I am, just the I am, right? And you can say, I am Kindra, I am Cathy. And it's like all these, pictures and things come to mind, all this stuff, right? All this stuff. And it's like, that is it's so important, right? It's like what you're saying literally is like hitting Control Alt Delete on your life, because what really are we? We are that constant, the part of us, the higher consciousness, the part of us that always was consistent, is a part of us that's not our story, not where you come from, not what your parents did, not what your zip code is, not your waistline, none of that. And it's just like we get so attached to the ego, to this
Mhm.
fictional story. So
Mhm.
in comes your book, and you're saying to people, choose your story, change your life,
Mhm.
and then you can silence this inner critic and rewrite it from the inside out. Explain how you did that, and then explain how you feel that other people can also do that.
Yeah, they're in and it's applicable in so many different areas of life. And I love what you're saying here about this like macro and almost fictional version of ourselves. That's this very high level, and we could call it like the macro story or the higher narrative. But we are all really made of the micro stories, those little moments where we did show up. There's one thing that we are proud of, or there's one interaction with a kid in second grade who was mean to us. And because we carry our stories again without us really knowing it, like these, our brain is constantly collecting, categorizing these memories, these stories that then shape from the inside out who we see ourselves to be. The challenge is it's never a matter of, am I telling myself a story? Because that is what that's how we make sense of the world. That's how we make sense of ourselves. It is, which stories am I choosing to tell myself about myself and who I am and what I'm capable of? And so, and the difference there, that choice is absolutely critical. So one of the examples that I do share in the book, a story that I struggled with for a long time, was my love and ambition and passion I had for my work, and desire to achieve whatever it was to get this message out there, um, meant that I was failing as a mother. Like the two things couldn't exist in the same space. One was always losing, and it made me miserable. So here I had this job that I love. I made it up myself. I have these kids and family that I love, and I couldn't enjoy either of them. And then additionally, it made me show up worse at work. It made me say no to opportunities because I was like, well, I really should be home or I should be doing this. Right. And so as I went through the process of the self storytelling method, which we can talk about, um, it was really constantly catching myself in this story. You're a bad mom. You're a bad mom. Anytime I was successful at work, it meant I was a bad mom. And then taking a look at deeper, okay, so what are the stories that are leading up to this bigger statement? And there, of course, were the stories of the missed pickups or the field trips that I wasn't on, or the time we were supposed to bring a sugar pumpkin for the pumpkin decorating. And I didn't realize it was a sugar pumpkin until too late, which those are smaller pumpkins, if you didn't know. So by the time I went to look for a sugar pumpkin, all the sugar pumpkins were sold out. So I like only had the option to send this, like, and I say this because of the detail with which my brain remembers these stories. I remember running around on a cold October night trying to find the right pumpkin. And then of course there were the stories from my own childhood and my mother, who was an exceptional mother. Her goal was to stay home with us. And it was a joyful day when she did. She had Pinterest worthy lunches before Pinterest was a thing, like the birthday parties where she was on every field trip. She would bring a guitar and sit in the back of the bus. I still remember the songs she would sing, and all of my friends thought, right? Okay.
That's so
So
special.
it
It's
was
so
so
rare and so
special and
special.
so beautiful. And my brain used that as ammunition to make me
Yeah.
miserable. Right. And so here I am doing, was really proud. I was doing great work and then felt like I was failing. And so it finally came to a point where and this is the next step of the method, where I had to like actually decide, like, how do I move forward from here? And if I have all these stories that are reinforcing this negative belief, are there stories in there that reinforce the opposite of times where I was actually crushing it as both a mother and someone who's really passionate about her work? And all of a sudden, I started thinking of some of these very specific stories, and one stood out. When my daughter was about 3, and we were at home building something on her bedroom floor, very pink with blocks. And she said, Mama, we're building a castle, which, was nice, helpful to know because it wasn't really clear at that point what we were building. So we're continuing to build the castle. And she said, and Mama, we live in this castle because we are 2 princesses, which the daughter is always the princess, but for the mom to be the princess and not the like old queen, I thought that was a win. And then she said, and it's a big castle, mama, because we are two princesses who go to work. And she was so proud and enthusiastic, and like, this is what, and the energy with which she said that, there was like a story was born in that moment, that maybe by pursuing, doing my best and pursuing my passion while raising my children, was teaching my children that they can dream as big as they want to. And it's not always going to be like a perfect castle. But so I tried telling myself that story and a variety of others. And over time, my feeling that constant angst that I had dissipated. Now it's come and gone because, of course, over the past couple of years, like, life has been like, what it is to be working versus what it was, and what it means to be a parent versus what it was has changed. But that was one of the stories, or one of the higher level stories of my belief in myself, that is, I would say, pretty permanently changed, because I know what to do now if it comes back up again.
I can totally relate to that. Totally relate to that. And I remember when my daughter was like, I have 3 girls, and when my oldest was like 18 months old, I had to leave for a meeting, and my mom came over to babysit. At that time, I didn't have full-time help. Actually, I still don't, because I still have a ton of guilt. So I've still never actually given myself the support I really need. That's the truth. So still have work to do on that story. But my mom came to babysit for a couple hours, and my daughter was crying. And I remember she said to me, "Oh, you never cried like that because, I just didn't go to work. So like you never had that kind of cry." And I got in the car and couldn't leave the driveway because I was sobbing. I felt so terrible about myself. And I thought about it so much, and I held myself back for years, like the same person I am with the same amount of passion and enthusiasm. And I was successful, but for like 7 or 8 years, I held myself at a certain place, and I tortured myself almost, like, because of that story. And I love that you're telling it, because my husband was vice president of Fox Sports for 15 years. Not one time did he ever get asked, "How do you juggle it? Like, how do you balance it?" And here I was, then we changed roles. He stopped working completely. I became the breadwinner. Since I made my first dollar, how are you juggling that? I mean, how do you balance, like, the inherent, like, here, let you hold all of this guilt and shame for what? Like, I'm just trying to live who I am, like, in my authentic experience. And I think it's so beautiful what you're saying, because 91% of our audience is women between the ages of like 30 and 40. And this just isn't, we're just not talking about this enough.
No, and it like, there are inherent, I mean, there are ways that our society works that are unfair, that don't make sense, and that are changing. They're not all the way there. And for the ones who are in the middle of the change, it just feels like it isn't changing fast enough around us. Um, and those are the moments where it's so important then to make the change within you, because now, like, here's what's so interesting. I got up this morning, I went to spin class. I have a full day. I went to spin, I came back to the apartment. We're in New York City. I met up with my husband and the kids and the dog on the street on their walk to school, so I could like walk them over to school. And then my son said, he was like, "Mama, have so much fun on your podcasts today." And I was like, "Oh, okay." He's like, "Do great. You're going to be great." And I was like, "Thank you." And so I came back, I got showered. My husband came back, and I said, "What was that about?" And he said, "Oh, I'm taking him to the park after school because, it's sunny, it's nice, and they know that you're doing your podcasts." And it was just such a, like, it, even now, because I changed the story within me. Now my sons, and of course they're going to the park, but they'd rather come home. It's still it's not warm out. The sun is out, but it isn't warm. Okay, they would rather come home. But it's, oh, mama's doing this thing. And so now it's become an ecosystem within our family. And then that becomes, each time I show up in the community and with my immediate friends, or as I, have the privilege and the honor to share my message wherever I'm sharing it, but it's all coming from within that then can be a gift or at least a perspective to give to somebody else as like, this is how we make those changes, but it has to truly start within you, and not feel that. And I love that you say I don't love that you say torture yourself, but that's exactly how I felt.
Yeah.
Tortured. And I hated being tortured by two things that I love. Like, it just did not seem like the way I wanted to exist in this world.
I totally get it. And just to like fast forward, when I was having my third daughter, I remember being in the hospital. We were being discharged, right, from having her. And my doctor goes, "Oh, they have this new thing now where you can have a postpartum session with a therapist before you leave the hospital. Do you want it? You seem like you're okay." And I was like, well, if that's part of it, yeah, I want it. Have her come in. So this therapist comes in and I just start bawling. And she's like, "What's up?" And I said, "I don't know. Like, before I walked in here, I had two little ones under 4 and I was pregnant. And now I am no longer pregnant, but I have 3 little ones. Like, am I doing enough?" This is literally what I said to her, Kindra. So but I'm not also pregnant. I said, and I want to
Right.
be worthy. And it's like, and she goes, "That's what you're asking me? You're juggling this. And you just said that you also have this beautiful job, this work that you do." And I'm like, "Yeah, and I do it all. And I don't have and it's like a nap time
Yeah.
empire."
Yep.
And
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
That's like a Nikki Elledge Brown comment. She
Yeah.
said that. But like, I was crying and I look back at that girl and I'm like, "Oh my goodness." Like, I can't believe the amount that we feel is required in order for us to just, not all of us feel this way, but I felt like in order for me to earn my seat at the table, it's like, yeah, I'm going to be a mom. And also I'm pregnant with the next thing and I'm helping and I'm this. And it's just
Mhm.
unbelievable. And then I started a podcast 10 days later when my little one was 10 days old. And I did it because I said to my husband, I am at this place where my sense of self is like, it's teetering on like something is very like, there's like
Mhm.
danger, there's a warning
Yeah.
sign. And I
Yep.
was like,
Yep.
I need to do actually something fully that I really want to do. And he said, "You know what? I'll wake up with the baby. You do a podcast." And still, I didn't have help, but I would record. At least I wasn't tired. And when she would nap during the day, I had already slept and I bottle fed her. Oh my God, for the first baby. And Kindra, she's 5. This show has almost 30 million downloads and I've gotten to touch so many lives. And I've come to a place where I'm like, oh, I'm so grateful that when my kids are in school now, right? They're all
Mhm.
from
Yeah.
9 to 3, like mommy's like so excited. And then when I go pick them up in carpool line, they're like, "Mommy, how did it go? And who did you meet?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
this is what's at stake. It's unbelievable.
Yep. Yep. And it is, and my hope is that, you know, I think we recognize what is at stake on some level. But there's the tendency to think then that there isn't really anything we can do about it. And my hope is that no, the thing that can be done is, what stories are we telling ourselves? So in those moments, like, that's a not enough thing. Like, I'm not enough. I'm not enough if I'm
Exactly.
pregnant. I'm not enough. It's not enough to just have children outside of your body. You need to have one growing inside you to be enough. Like, that serves no one. Um well, I mean, maybe there's a person that really, like, the thing they want to contribute to the world is more humans. And
Right. But what serves
then,
no one
yes,
is the "I'm not enough" feeling. That's what
is,
you
yeah,
meant.
exactly. Like I am not, and which, the ones with the 7 children, like, bravo. I love that you're like
No, but
fulfilling.
you're saying the
Yeah.
"I am not enough" is
Is
not serving anyone. If you want to have kids or paint or water ski, great. We're just saying don't walk around feeling like I'm not enough.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so what do we do about that? We catch ourselves in that not enough statement. Like that is it. And so what a beautiful thing that you happen to say yes to the postpartum therapist, which by the way, my youngest is 9 years old. I was like, I did not get that service. So that must be a
It's new.
recent development, which thank God. But thank goodness you had that conversation and that person could say, that story is crazy. Like that's not you're crazy, but this
Yeah.
is no. And so then in those moments to say, okay, what I need to work on are the stories of being enough. When have I been enough? My entire life, right? Like what are the instances that didn't require me growing a human to be
Right.
enough as how I
Right.
showed up? And like to have those to reprogram this limiting belief then that we have about ourselves.
Let me ask you this. This is interesting. I mean, because there's just so many things the inner critic says that we could literally sit here for 100 hours and it would actually be every hour would be fulfilling to talk about it.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the biggest ways the inner critic shows up that I've been hearing just a lot lately, more and more, is this idea of like, when I show up on social media, I compare myself and then I feel like I get into this like, just wacky dark web of my self-loathing, right? That whole thing. So, do I need to go off it completely? Can I still build a business? Like it's amazing how the ego, if you're not careful, it doesn't matter. It could be social media, it could be the mom's group after school, it could be anything. You could wind up in that same place of like, oh, I'm bouncing up against my ego and all of this fear and noise. But how do you, because you're somebody who you have this now, this awareness at least, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of that and building your business and looking at other women online and where you're at and where they are, how do you just do you and not
Yeah.
allow all that to be what it can be?
Yeah, and here's the thing. It requires constant effort. Like this is until it doesn't, until it comes more naturally, right? And then sometimes, maybe you've got this comparison thing under control, but maybe a few things go wrong with your business or whatever it is that you're comparing yourself and so you start to get insecure and then it feeds that negative comparison spiral. So there on a higher level, I think that is when we are in touch with our own stories of success and our own path forward. Uh, it's a way to build our like mental immune system to these other threats that we see floating around. And so, there are a lot of powerful women um doing powerful things and it is not hard. You don't have to move a finger even an inch to see another one, right? And there have been times even in the recent past where that inner critic, that comparison inner critic came up and was really giving me a hard time. So in those moments I rely. So again, it goes back to the stories. It goes back to the stories we tell ourselves and being very intentional about not letting the subconscious run away with what they have that you don't, or how but being very conscious about, okay, we are two separate people on two separate paths. Um, what are my stories of when I did things my way, who I am and what I am here to do, and I saw success. So like I can go back to high school speech meets. I can go back to the time I entered the talent show in college, and everybody else, it was like a very musical college. So everybody else was either singing or in a band singing. And my talent was telling stories and like how embarrassing it was to do. I remember I like auditioned and I thought I thought they wouldn't let me in. And then they did. And then the fear of being like, oh my gosh, I have to tell a story in front of all my college friends. Like this, what have I gotten myself into? And it was such a pivotal
Love
turning
that.
point for me. It was such an important memory. And it's one that I rely on anytime I'm like, I'm not going fast enough. I'm not doing this. It goes back to the enough. I'm like, wait, no, the best thing I can do is be me, do me. And I have 20 stories in big and small where being me was the best thing I could do. And
Yeah.
let me tell you, telling yourself those, so choosing them, that's why the book is called like choose your story, choosing those stories, then the world doesn't affect you in the same. Now, I'm not saying it never does, right? But if it does, you then know what to do. And so you get this disassociation with it. And one other hack actually that I use for just social media in general is they always say that it is the highlight reel, right? So if people are active on Instagram, and by the way, I feel like Instagram has lost their minds recently. So let's just put a pin in that. But it's the highlight reel. So we know that, right? We know that we scroll other people's and we're just seeing their best stories. So do you know what I do? I go back on days that I'm feeling like a little blue and I look at my own Instagram and I read my own stories of my highlights because they're all documented right there. And right there, I'm reminded of this little success and this poignant moment and this reason for why I do what I do. So use that, use that as fuel for yourself versus other people's highlight reels.
It's so good. And I love how you just keep coming back to like, you get to choose like which story. And, I love that example of how you're like, I guess I'm just going to tell a story because you're just in your own lane. And that's really cool. And one of the things for listeners who don't know a little bit about your journey, but you've worked at Success Magazine and you've been around so much of this and investigating it and being a part of this world of success and entrepreneurship and business and all of that. And one of the stories that I see come up for people a lot is this like imposter syndrome and like, I'm not enough. And here's how it's like, it's not only the I'm not enough, it's almost like I'm a fraud because there's experts and starting a business or being successful. And one of the stories that I see of successful people since I've been interviewing almost 600 people is just the claiming it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just the claiming of whatever it is. And I'm curious, in all the people you've met and in the work you've done, what do you feel has allowed people to be one or the other, to decide to like claim it?
Yeah.
And literally, like, that's the difference between Will Smith and Joe Schmo.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's it.
I think that that's exactly it. So I think that anyone who's suffering from imposter syndrome by default is a successful person because you only feel like an imposter when you're put in particular situations of elevation that the only way you would get there is if you were actually successful, right? So if you're struggling with, and so it's successful people being in successful situations and thinking that they don't belong there, right? That they aren't justified. So by default, if you're struggling with true imposter syndrome, you are a successful person because you have to be successful in order to feel like an imposter. That's like the whole basis of what this is. And so in the interviews that I've done, the most successful people who aren't carrying around the weight of imposter syndrome are doing exactly what you said, have owned the success that they've earned. And I think what happens for success, so the successful people who are still struggling with it and the successful people who aren't any longer struggling with imposter syndrome, the difference is all successful people are focused on the next thing. We're all focused on what else can we do? How else can we help? How can we make this? You're filled with new ideas. You're right. Like this is how can I grow? How can I change? Like this is just part of the success DNA. And in that process, when you're always thinking about the next thing, by default, we don't really pay attention to what we've already done, big or small, right? Unless it was a mistake, an error, and then we hyper focus on that to learn our lesson and make sure that we can't consider it a failure because we've learned our lesson. But remember, our brain still hangs on to that negative experience and plays it back for us like, okay. So it sounds like a poster or like an Instagram quote that you could put out there. You need to celebrate your wins, right? Celebrate your wins. Self-care in big ways or small ways, whatever it is. And that's true. And you should do that. But let's go back to that. What you said is what is at stake is if we don't celebrate our wins, we don't fully metabolize the story of that win. We don't feel it, which emotion is so important for stories. We don't see the details of it. We just take it and brush it under the rug like it's something we got to hide before our parents come in and ask us if our room is clean. So yeah, no wonder you feel like an imposter because you've been throwing away all of the great stories that prove that you aren't. That's on you. Okay. So if this is something you've been struggling with, and again, the successful people who aren't struggling with imposter syndrome have figured this out. And they recognize that celebrating your wins isn't just self-care. It isn't arrogance. It is necessary as ammunition, as evidence of stories of where they've been so they can keep moving forward. So that's what I would say. If that's something you're struggling with, it is your job right now, as uncomfortable as it may be, because maybe you were told not to boast. Maybe you were told not to, don't focus, which we're all done in good headlines, right? Don't focus on today's headlines. They'll be in the trash tomorrow. What are you doing next? These are all great things to keep moving people forward, except that they create this distorted view of the credibility of where we are today. So go back today, take some time and think about your successes, big and small. It doesn't matter. The ones that you're most proud of, the ones that are like, go back to high school, go back to graduate school, go back to, when you got your first job, maybe you never went to school, and celebrate and remember those stories in full detail. That'll help with your imposter syndrome.
I love it so much. And I love that you gave that little assignment at the end. So I just want to boost it again. And for anyone who's listening, take a second and either, do this when you finish listening or pause right now and just write down three things that you can pull over to the side of your life and say, forget what other people will think or see about this. I personally am so proud that I texted that person how I really felt, or that I was able to post that thing, or I was able to take some time off, or whatever you want to be proud of, celebrate it. You're right. We skip that a lot. Now, sort of changing course here, one of the things I want to make sure we talk about is another thing that you're such an expert in, which is not only storytelling, what we tell ourselves, but storytelling in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk about how storytelling, for those listeners right now who are building brands and businesses, I want to talk about how storytelling is really vital for that, and how we can figure out, because people will be like, well, I don't have a story like yours. And I'm like, OMG, don't even say that to me. So how can we understand how storytelling affects our brand, and what are some steps to do that so that we can actually invite people into a world of this beautiful story?
Yeah, I think I would say that is, so that was my first love, right? Like is the stories that we tell outwardly. And the reason I even wrote my first book that talks about this, which is Stories That Stick, is because I just kept seeing two things. Number one, that people had started talking about storytelling in business, whether it was corporate or whether it was entrepreneurs. This was starting to become a buzzword. However, number two, people were missing it entirely. They weren't grasping what a story really is. I think they understood why it mattered. And in case you're not aware of why a story matters, especially as entrepreneurs, is stories are how humans connect. This is how we build bridges between people. This is how we build bridges between the product's features and what those features will actually mean in our lives. We follow people who are generous, if you're thinking about leadership, with the stories that they tell so that we feel like we know them. And so, especially now as businesses become more and more and more personalized in that way, and even the big brands are built on a personal brand, right? An individual. It's what happens. So the opportunities are everywhere. And we forget that people want to do business with people, not with businesses, right? So, but the problem
Wow.
that and how do you do a business with a person? If all you're putting out there is your brand or your logo. So this is the thing, brand is storytelling. Um, nobody, I mean, logos are nice and they become the visual shorthand for the brand, but a brand is made of stories. And especially if you're an entrepreneur and not like a huge, multinational brand or whatever the case may be, your stories are what is going to connect people to you. Now, the problem I hear, and you mentioned it right there, Cathy, is, well, I don't have a story. And what you're really saying in this moment is, my story isn't, again, enough. My story isn't big enough. My story isn't dramatic enough. My story isn't tragic enough. My story isn't
Right.
made for the big screen. Here's the thing, it doesn't have to be. Like, that isn't that's the disconnect when it comes to outward stories, is we think that a story is something that is should be in a big news article or on
Right.
the silver screen, when really it's the very small stories that people connect with. And so that's where I want to start, is if you're someone who says, I know I need to be sharing my story, but I don't have any, it's because you're misunderstanding what makes a story. Not only that, but there is also this belief that there is one story. And that you've got to figure out your story, like one singular story. But the reality is, we all have a variety of points along our journey where we discovered that we were meant to do the thing that we're doing, when we found a passion for it, when it iterated or changed or became something different than it was right at the beginning. And so you are allowed to have many smaller stories. And what I see happen is people try to like cram it all together to create one big story, which waters it down and dilutes it and makes it not as nearly as valuable as it could be. Clearly, I feel strongly about this, Kat. I don't even know if I answered your question, but
Oh my God, you so answered the question, and I want to go further with it, but that is so important. Like everything you just said, and I was thinking about some serious things and also some silly things, but in terms of like things that happen in your life that, like, remember that video that went viral about the girl who was trying to just return the candles to Bed Bath and Beyond?
oh yeah.
And it was hysterical because we've all had these tiny little things where you're just like, can I just get the customer service? And she was so sincere. And she was like, and I went back and then I went to this it was Bath and Body Works. I went to this bath and we were all laughing because we were like, I love this. This is like my life. I relate. Right. And it wasn't like she won the Kentucky Derby or whatever else.
Exactly.
Okay. So there was that. And I was also thinking about things that I've gone through that were hard things that I was like, oh, should I really tell this? People have been through worse. People have been, and it's like, it mattered to people. I got tons of letters just from telling that story. So that is so important that you just shared all of that. It's very clarifying. Now, when it comes to your last book, Stories That Stick. So I'm looking at these like 4 pieces, right?
Yeah.
The value of the story, the founder story, the purpose story, the customer story. How do we do that in a way when you're like thinking about your brand, your social media, how you show up in the world?
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that in a way where it feels authentic, right? You don't feel like it's like fake and branded, and yet you touch on these notes because they are critical. Like it is
Yeah.
important to then, it's how you throw a rope to someone and go, I get you because I have a story and so do you. So to not do that, it's kind of also missing the point.
Yeah, I feel like the authenticity thing is really solved by the acknowledgement of the value of a small story.
Okay.
And that, like you said, like the Bath and Body Works candle girl, it's
So
because like
funny.
I've been you, I understand you. And even if you, let's say you never bought a candle, like you're anti-candle or something, you can still appreciate the nonsense
Frustration.
of
Yeah.
it all, right? Okay, so So there are those 4 stories that you just mentioned: the value story, the founder story, the purpose story, and the customer story. Was really kind of just a way that something I wanted to offer to readers, of a way to think about the different kinds of stories. Because let's say you've decided, I want to be better at storytelling in my business, and you're like, but where do I even start? The,
Exactly.
the problem, like that question alone can be a stopping point.
Oh
And so
yeah.
when it comes to like, where should I start? Usually there's one of 2 places that you need to start. If you are launching a new company, if you're trying to differentiate yourself, maybe it's a new concept altogether. Maybe you're pitching people, or you're creating kind of like that keystone video that goes on your website that says who you are and why you're the person to start this company, and people are buying you more than, quite honestly, but at least as much as they're buying what it is that you have to offer. If that's where you're at with your business, then you're going to want to take that's a founder story. That's a story of that. So that would be the place to start. Like, where did this start for you? And some of the obvious ones are, I mentioned in that book, the Airbnb guys. And so when they were pitching to
Mm-hmm.
get money, right, from investors, they told the story of how they came up with the idea. And it was an authentic story. It was a true story. And that's what I'm saying. This is all about true stories, okay? But they told something as simple as how they came up with the idea. They told it in its fullness. And we can talk about this too, like, what are the 4 components that make a great story? But they included all of those, and that is what stuck, got them their investment, and that's what got it going. So that's a founder story. Which may be the place you need to start. The other really important story for entrepreneurs is the value story, which is telling the stories of the value that your products, your services, who you are, what that brings to the world. And so when you've seen what you do in action, or when you saw someone do something that wasn't using your method or whatever, and it didn't turn out the right way, that story can illustrate the value of what you have to offer. Again, so we're bridging the gap between what you can provide for people and what the marketplace understands that to be.
I love it. If anyone who's listening, just go back and take notes, because this is so valuable, and everyone's going to need to get both of these books if they don't already have them. And we'll put links to everything. But what about pictures? Like, so often, right? They say a picture tells 1,000 words, and we live in a time where people have no attention span. So if you want to tell it in pictures, or you want to do it with a reel, what are some of the things that you just maybe lean in towards?
Yeah, I think that, and we're seeing this, right? Even in the way that the algorithms are changing. But the thing to remember is, again, it goes back to biology. So while we are concerned about people's shrinking attention spans, there's a study in Stories That Stick where neurologists wanted to measure change in brain chemistry after somebody heard or watched a story. And the chemicals that were raised as a result of hearing this story were cortisol and oxytocin. Cortisol increases focus and attention, and oxytocin is, of course, known as the trust hormone. So biologically speaking, when you are telling a story, it no longer is about getting someone's attention. They won't be able to resist giving it to you because our bodies are programmed that way. So that isn't the
Mind
fear.
blown. Never heard that. That's amazing. It makes sense. I've lived that experience and never really put that together.
It is the ultimate. I don't know why. I've always just kind of been like weary of the word hack, but it is the ultimate brain hack. Okay. Like, that is now the key here is then you do have a very short period of time to let your audience know, to signal to their brains that they're going to hear a story, okay? Or that they're going to read a story. And so the trick then is to whether it's in your so the best marrying, if we're talking about it started with, a picture is worth 1,000 words. No, I mean, what that's saying is pictures can be extremely compelling. Pictures evoke a lot of emotion. But if you take a really compelling photo and pair it with a compelling story, that that's where the magic really is. But again, the secret here is, and I can't actually say that I've mastered it necessarily, especially in reels. I know it. I haven't fully committed to the whole reels endeavor. Again, I know that's my deal. But if you have a caption to a photo that the first line that they see, the first 5 words before it scrolls, indicates that there is going to be a story told there, people will stay on the photo longer. Now, I don't have the research to prove this except for my own captions. Like, I can see those that I tell the story. And if I do a really good job in those first 5 words of saying, hey, there's going to be a story here. I've also seen this in stories, on Instagram stories. If you had this happen where like, you won't get that many views on Instagram stories, but then you're having a day, right? And the day is, and you're like, and people start to realize that you're going to be telling the story of this day. And that is when they keep coming back, because again, they can't help themselves. I know.
Like, what happened next? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And maybe I shouldn't talk about this or not, but right around the holidays, my whole family went down with COVID. Fine. We were fine. Grateful for that. And I decided to be open about it on Instagram. That's fine. I didn't, it is what it is. More views than the past 2 years, because people wanted to hear that story. Now there's also, they wanted, there's a little more drama involved in that too, but they wanted to hear that story. Anytime you go on vacation, it's not just because people want to see your vacation photos. Sometimes that makes it worse, right? To watch you on vacation. But when you're on vacation, you're usually showing the story of this. Whereas if you're just like, hey guys, I just had such a busy day, I did this, this, and this, they're not tuning in for that. It's the story.
So good. We also had COVID right around the holidays too, the whole fam.
I know. The group effort.
Yeah, it was a group effort. So let's just, as we're sort of like signing off, we have a few more minutes. I want to circle back to the most recent brand new book that came out just a month ago. Because this is so important now. We've talked about stories, and think about what I'm talking to the listeners now. Think about what Kindra just said about how if you're telling a story, you get hooked. So imagine when you tell yourself a story, how you get hooked, right? And then imagine that your brain is telling you that story on repeat 70,000 times a day. So Kindra, the question I wanted to ask you is, for people who are listening and they're like, okay, I get it. Like, this has to change then, because I can't be hooked into this story I don't want to choose over and over. But let's say they leave this podcast and then 3 days from now, they're right back in it. I guess my question to you is, in the book, how do you really help us to pivot our thinking?
Yeah.
Period. So it doesn't just do that for 5 minutes and then we just go right back. How do we sustain that?
Yep. So in the book, I lay out a 4-part methodology that we worked through a group of, research participants. This is like the pathway to take to making permanent change. Now, sometimes, again, permanent change, it's permanent kind of with asterisks around it or quotations around it, because different things come up. We have to rework our stories. That's life. But here are the 4 steps. I'll give you a head start. And it's actually the last one that is the answer to your question. So the first step is catching these subconscious stories in the act, becoming aware of them, seeing them for what they are. I was in a spin class last week. Spin class, I usually feel really strong. It's one of my good story places, but I'd been traveling because I was back keynote speaking, which was exciting. Body's not used to traveling. I was in heels. Body's not used to being in heels. Right. And so I got to spin class and I felt like, at first I thought there was something wrong with the bike. And then it became very clear that something was quote unquote wrong with me. Now, it wasn't wrong with me. So I caught myself in that moment that my brain was going to go one of two direct. Well, no, there was really only one direction my brain
Yep.
was going to go. And that is, you didn't work out enough while you were gone. Look at how weak it is, no matter how, blah, 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 blah. Like I could see it going. And so I caught that right there. Right. I know what this is. And I said, all right, what other stories could I tell myself? So catching it in the act. The second step is analyzing those stories, which is actually what I did right then. I was like, oh, where are these stories coming from? And I'm like, oh, I know. It's because I didn't work out and my brain is trying to tell me that it's all my fault. It's coming from other times where I've fallen off the exercise wagon because I got too busy with work and I didn't prioritize myself. I understand where that's coming from. It's important to understand what your stories are, where they're coming from, and most importantly, are they serving you or not? The answer was no, this is not serving me. So the third step then is to choose. That's what we've been talking about most of this time is choosing better stories. But the fourth step, and this is where I say it's the answer to your question, is installing these chosen stories.
Yes.
And actively, with discipline, retelling yourself the stories that serve you. Now, this could be every morning. And in order to do that, it's really important that you capture them, that you maybe you write them down and maybe you text them to yourselves. Maybe you have an email folder that says stories I choose, whatever it is. Maybe you read them in the morning. Maybe you read them to yourself before you go to bed so that they are vivid. And these stories should include the emotions that you felt, the moment where it happened, some of those specific details. You can install these stories, as a way to start your day or in your most vulnerable moments, right? Like if you know that every time you walk into a meeting, you start going into this deep, dark spiral, tell your chosen stories there. It is really that final act of changing the default that makes the difference.
It's so good. What a perfect place to sort of sum up. You are awesome. I feel like this episode had so many nuggets that were both sort of like things that are so important for your mental health and for your well-being, but also you do such a good job of giving like really tangible, helpful things that we can really go and like intentionally do to increase like our impact in the world. So I'm loving your whole vibe and I'm so glad we met. So tell everybody where they can buy the book and where they can find you.
Yes, you can get the book. I mean, what do you say? Wherever books are sold. But really, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org is a website you can go to support local bookstores.
Nice.
So if you have a local bookstore, you can go there.
Love
My
that.
website is Kindra Hall, KINDRAHALL.com. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. I think I'm on YouTube. I am on YouTube. I got some videos on YouTube. So that's where you can find me. Those are the best places.
You are so adorable. And I always am impressed when somebody who's so pretty is so humble. I'm like,
Oh,
your mom did a good job with you.
oh, thank you. That is such a nice thing to say on so many levels.
It's so true. It's so true. So I'm so glad that we met and stay in touch. I want to be friends with you. So stay in touch.
I know. Can we be? I would like to be friends.
Yeah, we are.
Okay, good. Okay, we're friends. Yay, it's official.
Have the best rest of your day. I'll say hi to you on DMs.
Okay, do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kindra. That's awesome.